Welcome to Launch Stories. So we're all about connecting and educating Chilliwack entrepreneurs. And thanks to our sponsors for their helping put this on every month. It's tremendous that we've got the Chilliwack Economic Partners, the Chilliwack Innovation Network, and the University of Fraser Valley as our core sponsors. And we also have Cowork Chilliwack, Currency Marketing, and Wisebox. We're the folks that are doing the heavy lifting and putting this on every month. And you guys are supporting it, which is fantastic. We really appreciate that. So without further ado, I would like to invite our guest to the stage. I'm thrilled to introduce Nicki Bullock. She is the co-founder of Culture Co. Come on up, Nicki. And I'm not sure what we're supposed to do yet, right? So one of the things we do is I do a pre-interview with my guests just to get a lay of the land. And yours is the most, it's like a treasure map trying to do it. And I was putting some slides together. And Nicki, I asked guests to send me some pictures. And you sent me a bunch of really great ones. I realized, though, I need a square monitor because they're all from Instagram. So,
it is true.
So you'll see some black on the sides.
The IG feed is real.
Yes.
Yeah.
So tell me about you growing up.
Well, I would say that I could sum that up by my nickname, which was Bossy Bum. So from the time I was about 3 years old, and I'm not exactly sure when it wore off, that was pretty much what everyone called me. So I would say that I was developing my leadership skills from a very early age, but always just had a lot of ideas, I think, pretty much from the get-go. Mm-hmm.
That right off the bat, though, is such a stereotypical way to categorize a young, confident woman, right? Or even an older, confident woman. It's like, you're bossy. And whereas a guy, that's just the way it is, right? So
for sure.
Probably from the get-go, you realized that maybe it wasn't an even playing field in some ways.
Yeah, I think that there was probably one point where perhaps that felt like a negative connotation, but then I think I worked my way through that. I was raised by a single mother, so she was pretty strong in who she was and who she knew she was. And so I tried to really adopt that to say, okay, yes, perhaps the negative connotation is that bossiness is not a great thing. However, if I apply that in a way that creates meaningful conversations, then maybe it's not quite bossy. Maybe it's just idea generation, or maybe it is, someone who comes to the table who isn't afraid to say things that maybe some other people are. So I tried to reframe it, and that's probably the moral of my entire life, is that I tried to reframe every negative aspect or sort of idea that people had about me and reframe it into something that turned hopefully into a great positive.
Awesome. And so you grew up in Chilliwack, correct?
I did. I was born here. Yeah.
And then you graduated and you said, I'm out of here.
I did.
You headed to...
Peace out, Chilliwack.
You're college bound and you went to the University of...
It was TRU. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So, TRU in Kamloops, correct?
In Kamloops, yeah. Yes. So it wasn't TRU then. It was still UCC. That's how old I am.
Right.
But anyways, everyone knows it as TRU now. But yeah, it was sort of the opportunity to go, okay, how can I spread my wings? This town had always been amazing to me, but just wanting to achieve something different. And I always had a lot of ambition, I think, to go and try new things. And that was sort of the first opportunity I had to be able to do that independently as my own person. Right. Yeah.
And so you went to Kamloops with the idea of studying...
I thought I was going to be a teacher, which I bless all teachers. It would have been a train wreck for me to step into that. Just ask my own children. But I really love to educate. And so that's still a huge aspect of who I am and certainly a part of our business now. But I sat down with just one of the people who guides you or whatever, like a guidance counselor essentially. And they said, hey, we have this brand new program. It's event planning. I think that maybe you would do better in that. And that seemed like the most exciting sort of combination of my skills. I had taken entrepreneurship in high school and was quite passionate about, I was in leadership. I, organized all sorts of fundraisers, and that sort of felt like a cross section of my skills. And just felt like a little bit of a relief that I wasn't going to become a teacher. So I thought that was probably a really great place to land. So I said, sure, why not? Let's try that. So it was a very intense course load, but started on that pretty much right away. So.
And a piece of that was you had to find an internship to apply what you had learned.
Yes, correct. So in the summertime, after I completed my first year, we had to find our own internship. And so there was someone who had been a very close mentor to me who I worked for many, many years. His sister had an event planning company in Portland, Oregon, and said, hey, would you like me to hook you up with my sister? And I said 100%. And so I went and completed that internship and they asked me to stay. So I ended up dropping out of school. Who needs school when you're getting your dream job, right? Come on.
For sure.
So decided, why would I pay all this money to get the same outcome? So I decided to stay down there for a bit.
Yeah, and Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, among other college dropouts,
people.
Right?
Yes, right.
Oh, for sure.
proud dropout to all the students in here.
So how did you navigate going to the U.S.? Was it pretty much just, I'm going for the weekend?
Yeah, pretty much just, nothing too formal. That was at a time where things weren't quite the same as they are now for going down and for going elsewhere, obviously abroad. So it was sort of more of a fly by the seat of your pants, come back up, come back down,
right.
Sort of. Yeah.
And were you up and down every week, or you were staying at?
No, I would stay down. I didn't know anyone when I moved down there. So I was 20. I had just turned 20. So that felt like a pretty big, packed up my car, with it was like, like a movie, like I had 2 boxes and that was my life belongings. And, moved down into a house with someone that I didn't know. She had a separate space and just kind of met people as I went. But at the beginning, you're kind of like, oh, I know no one. So
and you were event planning at that point, or learning to do that.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, this company worked across the U.S.
Yes. We produced trade shows all across the U.S. So I got to travel a little bit as well, which was really amazing. Worked with a fantastic team. Learned a lot about culture, even though I didn't know what culture was. I didn't have the language of what that was at that time. Had a very interesting boss, but took as much as I could from that experience and used it, obviously, even now to this day.
Define interesting.
Well, she would often call people stupid, idiot. That is the worst idea I've ever had, like right in the middle of meetings. And I, again, was the youngest person there by probably 10 years. All the ideas in the land, all the energy of someone who doesn't know what this person's like. So I just came in there and obviously shared as much as I could think of. But she would just call you out right in the middle. And I realized quite quickly other people would not share in those moments.
Because they had it previously beaten out of them, likely, right?
100%.
Yeah.
But that wasn't really who I was. And so I would keep sharing, but I would notice that she would then tell me it was a terrible idea, stupid, or she would use coarse words. And then she would propose that idea a few weeks later as her own, which was just a great life learning skill.
Love the work, not so much the company and the environment.
Not the company, yeah. And so,
how long were you an intern for? Or I guess, did you transition from intern to full-blown employee?
So my internship was, I think it was the 2 months over summer. And then from there, I transitioned into a position.
Got it.
Which was amazing. Making US dollars at that time was really fantastic. So I loved that part of it. And just living in a new city and experiencing things, there's no GPS at that time. Like I'd have a map, and...
Did you have a voodoo donut?
Yeah. I don't even know if that was there.
Okay.
I don't recall that being a thing.
We stayed in a line for like 2 hours to get, it's a donut.
Donuts weren't cool then because there was no Instagram. So nothing was cool. But I would go and I would explore and I would get myself lost. And then I would have to try and figure out where I was. And it was such a great time, I think, for me, even just growing as a human.
And then your next step was, is this the correct order? So were you
Yes.
back in Vancouver?
I was back in Vancouver.
Okay.
Yeah. So that wasn't while I was in Portland.
Got
so
it.
I was back in Vancouver. I had moved back and had an opportunity to work as a wedding planner, which like that was right when the movie The Wedding Planner came out with J-Lo, and she like had the headset.
Okay.
Like it's come a long ways. But I was like, yes, that sounds amazing, but also not sustainable. Like in the back of my mind, only planning weddings for the most part, happens in a pretty short, season. So the sustainability of that long term never felt like it was really there. But when I got that job, there was no other planner. And so I sort of developed a little bit. I had the most amazing opportunities that I look back now on and think, how on earth did I get those as a 22-year-old, like baby chicken? Like I was, like I had no life experience. I definitely wasn't married. I had, there was not a lot, but I had opportunities to plan $1 million wedding. I was constructing venues out of like in the middle of a field. We would bring in power, we would bring in catering, we'd bring in bathrooms, we built these things and I say we, it was really just me and my team of suppliers, would build these things literally out of my brain into something. It was
Right.
pretty incredible.
And you caught the eye of a reality television producer.
Correct.
And
yeah.
they recruited you it was around 2003. And the name of the show was Making It Big.
It was, yeah.
I was scouring the internet trying to find pictures.
Like it's on, I don't know if it's on a DVD or VHS. I'm pretty sure it's a DVD. I don't think I'm that old. But I got a phone call on a Friday afternoon from the production company that was located in Vancouver, asking if I would be interested to put together an application for the show, and thought 100%. All of my J-Lo dreams are coming true right now. I definitely am going to do that. And so I scrambled because they were on a pretty tight timeline, and I ended up being chosen to participate in the reality. And it was like an actual reality television show back then. Like we competed, there was there was real people involved, and it was a pretty amazing experience. And I ended up winning it, which again blew me away because the people who I was competing with had years and years in the event industry. One other person from Vancouver, the other lady was from Chicago, and got an opportunity again of unbelievable proportion of going down and working with Sharon Sachs, who is a celebrity event planner. She actually planned 2 of J-Lo's weddings, 2, not 1, 2. It was so good. She came back again. I don't know if she did her and Ben Affleck's, but anyways.
Yeah, I didn't think about the repeat customer aspect now.
It was a thing. I didn't get the chance to repeat any of my clients, but apparently in the celebrity world, that can happen quite quickly. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm just trying to figure all that out. And at the time, you were working for a company in Vancouver, in the big city, essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
And tell me about, that was a 5-year span, and you mentioned huge events and...
So my time with the company was not a 5-year span. So what happened is that right after I was on the show, I started to say to myself, okay, I think it's time for me to do my own thing. Like I have had these great opportunities. The company itself didn't have any other planners, so it wasn't really an event planning company. It was just that I was doing that, and they had other facets of wedding business that they did. And she happened to say to me one day, we need to go for lunch. And I was like, excellent. Like I was ready to tell her I'm giving my notice. And she laid me off. And that was, again, I tried to really act like I was a little bit upset. Oh gosh, okay. All right, what am I going to do? How am I going to figure this out? But I think that was one of those pivotal moments where I was like, okay, the universe is granting me exactly what I've asked for. So it's laying out in front of me the next step, which for me was starting my own business.
Yeah, and that's essentially you going solo. And with the lucky circumstance that you were laid off, you were basically able to go into the self-employment program and learn everything from a business standpoint. And that, I think they matched you with Chilliwack. And did you end up kind of back here?
Yeah, I ended up connected into the Chilliwack office and
Right.
just learned a lot through that process and had the opportunity to get guidance on putting a business plan together, understanding how cash flow works. I worked with a business coach right off the bat outside of that, like separately. I hired someone and worked with her for 5 years, but just was always open to receiving the information, I think, from anywhere that I could get. And I mean, back then, like, again, I was in my early 20s, so this was almost 20 years ago. The internet didn't really exist in the way that it does now. Like, Facebook was barely a thing. Like, Tim and I were chuckling that it was MySpace. Like, that's not even around anymore. So it was, I had a website, and that was like, oh my gosh, you have a website. That's fancy town, So having all of the information at your fingertips was not really there yet, and it's like now you can literally Google how to start a business and
Right.
get inundated with information. But at that point, I really relied on my network of people.
Right.
Yeah.
And you kept it small. I think at one point you had one full-time employee, but
Yeah.
the event planning business is much like a Hollywood production in many senses. You put a team together, you come together, do the job well, and then disband and kind of up and down. And I think a key to building your business was building that network. How did you do that?
I did. Honestly, just through people, just relationship building. And so the only game back then was networking. So meeting face to face at events like this, connecting with people one-on-one, that was essentially the only option to get your name out there. Social media didn't exist. So it was really just face-to-face interactions. And I, again, just met some unbelievable people, formed really deep relationships with them. And we ended up sort of becoming a referral system to each other. So, I was the one who would connect all those dots, but then they would have, couples come in or companies approach them for events and would say, hey, do you need a planner? Nicki can do that. So we became a really pretty tight-knit referral source to each other, which, I think back again and think at the end of the day, business is really about people. There's technology and obviously we have so much opportunity online, but at the end of the day, it's really this that, will move the dial forward really for any of us.
And so you're probably approaching late 20s, almost 30, and you're starting to think, what's the next phase of my life? And it's, I would say, a unique challenge for women versus men, right? A male entrepreneur starts their job, they might get married and they'll charge ahead, but there's no consideration of, well, I'm going to put that on pause or so forth. And I've heard it described as a double bind and different things, but can you explain what you were feeling and where you were at in your life and some of the changes that needed to happen?
Yeah. So right after I was on the reality television show, I met my soon one-day husband. He wasn't my husband right off the bat. I think he actually tried to run for me a little bit, but he can tell you that later. When we sort of decided, okay, we're going to start thinking about buying a house and having a family, I knew pretty much right away that it wasn't sustainable for me to continue at the rate that I was going, because events happen on evenings and weekends and all the planning happens during the week. So it's kind of like a 24/7 job. You don't really get an opportunity to say like, oh, pump the brakes. I'm going to have a baby and, I'll shelf that till later. So it became pretty obvious to me that wasn't going to be able to be sustainable through having a family. And we really were considering moving back to Chilliwack at that point to be able to buy a house and not just live in an apartment. When I lived in Yaletown, I remember my neighbor had little ones, probably 2, and he would ride his tricycle up and down the hallway. And I thought, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. Like, I was used to growing up here where, we had 1/3 of an acre and I ran wild and, we skated in our backyard when it was, winter. So it was just, I couldn't get myself there. And I know there's lots of families that do it, but I couldn't place my children in that environment. And so it became time for me to move on from that entrepreneurial journey and sort of put myself into something different.
Well, and really, it's that notion of how do you balance everything? And so
You don't.
you moved back to the Fraser Valley and had your first child, and at that point, were you winding up your solo entrepreneur venture, or were you still kind of doing it? And
No, I had wound it up before that.
Got it.
So again, when we knew, I was going back and forth, and unfortunately, as much as I love this town, the budgets of what I was working within were just not here. And so
there's no $1 million weddings in
no $1 million
Chilliwack?
weddings. No. And I mean, that was like almost 20 years ago. So I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do what I was doing here versus there. And so for a while, both Rob and I were commuting into the city, but knew that that wasn't really going to be what we wanted for ourselves, like long term. So I started looking at opportunities and found one in a completely irrelevant, very different industry.
And that was rehabilitation.
That is, yeah, at CBI Health Group. So it was working for a national company. Again, like someone who had never really worked. I mean, I'd worked other jobs, but not really worked for a huge company.
Now, did you find going from entrepreneur to employee restrictive, or were you hear the term entrepreneur or the ability to kind of really be a catalyst for that? Tell me about that experience.
I was always just really honest with them. And I think that I've interviewed probably 1,000 people now, just since that time, since starting there and up until now. And you can tell when people are not really being truthful about their skill set. And I've always been pretty understanding of myself. And so I knew that my entrepreneurialness was not going to disappear just because I was now inside of a box of what this job looked like. So I sort of needed them to work with me on that to allow me to kind of spread my wings there and allow that skill set to just be used in a different way. So it felt restrictive sometimes, but also they allowed me a lot of freedom to build things. And really at the end of the day, that's what I love most is building things. So as long as they sort of kept me doing that, it felt okay. And I had 3 babies along the way too. So it was kind of...
Right. I think there they are.
There they are. Look at that COVID hair.
Wow.
That's some COVID hair that hadn't had a haircut in a
And
while.
there's another one of your kids there. And another one.
Right? Just all those.
And so how long were you with CBI?
For 8 years.
And what were the different roles you had there?
I started as an administrator, so really overseeing one singular department, and then again noticed a need. So problem solving, I think, is something that I just naturally gravitate towards. If I see a problem, I'm like, hey, I've got about 15 different ideas of how we can solve that, and just kept pointing out the problems and coming up with solutions. So they sort of let me expand into creating a regional office that sort of supported the housing of multiple different projects. And then I moved into recruiting and retention for the entire province. So for all 1,300 employees. So
Wow.
I recruited for all of the positions. I developed all the leaders. And then I worked on all of our retention initiatives as well.
So that was exciting, obviously, and lots of challenges. And at what point did you feel, okay, I need to move on? Like, what was your next move in your mind?
Yeah, so it was becoming quite obvious that there was friction in our value system. I think in how what the CEO really viewed the business assets versus what I saw the business assets were. And so, again, being someone who isn't all too afraid of saying the things that I see, he didn't always enjoy that piece, I think, of me. So I would say that we didn't have an aligned vision of where I wanted to take the province of BC. Funnily enough, they ended up developing out my position at head office, and like have since put it across the country. And I do giggle about that, and I think, oh, okay, he just didn't want to give me the credit. That's fine. But it just became pretty clear that they were trying to put me in a box at that point, and that is where I start to suffocate.
Got it. And you've got a lot of really cool expressions you've sent in some of your pictures, and but
I overloaded Tim with pictures.
you did. But it was really interesting and I find that really revealing of what pictures people send to me. And I think what you did learn at CBI among like managing a company that got to 1,300 employees was really what's become your passion, and that's company culture.
For sure. I mean, that position really gave me the language and of what culture even is, and actually just the impact that it has. And so I've done culture work my whole life, but without understanding that what I was doing was culture building, So I really learned that there, and they gave me the opportunity with no education. Like, again, I, dropped out, was an event planner, just had a lot of ideas. They allowed me so much freedom and flexibility to sort of say, hey, what about this? Because I've always been able to feel that, that sense of like when you walk into somewhere and you're like, ooh, it doesn't feel good in here. Or, oh, it feels like these people are really happy. Like, I want to come back here. That has always been just kind of like a sixth sense for me. And so I really utilize that in my work now, but really as I was developing that piece out.
And so your next move is you went from CBI to Intuitive, which is another company, smaller, growing, Chilliwack based, but you had a unique proposal for the owner there.
Yes. So Culture Co was really stirring in me for probably about 3 years before I said it out loud. So I have a really loud inner voice. Like, does anyone have a loud, like, first it's like a little whisper, then it's like a little knock, and then it's like shaking me every day. That's kind of like, I should listen to it when it's a whisper, but I don't. I'm like, psh, come back later when I have more time. But I knew that I wanted to be able to help small businesses or medium-sized businesses who couldn't necessarily afford to have a department of people who do this, or even just a full-time staff member to do this work. But I had seen the impact that it made quite quickly when people pay attention to that piece. So I really wanted to be able to bring that to more businesses. And so I had said to Michelle, who is the owner of Intuitive, hey, why don't you let me use you as a guinea pig, essentially? And she said, no, thanks, but you can come work for me. So I thought, okay, let me just see if I can do what I think I can do inside an organization and sort of apply it in the same way that I would if I was consulting, like if I was,
So for folks that don't, the term culture is somewhat abstract, and
it is.
But culture and people would typically live in the HR department of a larger corporation. What is Nicki Bullock's definition of culture through all of your experience?
Tim, that's such a great question. I think that my definition, or certainly what I've seen, is that culture is our behaviors. So there's a lot of businesses out there who say that they are things. We are this, we are that. And then when you actually get there, the systems and the way that they behave with one another is the complete opposite. And so I believe that culture is really it's essentially our values put into action through behaviors. So it's intentionally deciding, hey, we say we're this, so this is how we're going to act. So what we do, the process of how we do that is that we take those values first, and then we drill them down into actionable items. So if you say fun is a value of yours, and then everything is really boring and you don't celebrate, that's kind of a contradiction, of you saying who you are. It doesn't add up, right? And so that's, here nor there, but it doesn't really matter what the value is. It's just that most of the time people are not living those values. And so I create the process in which those things coexist together.
So while you were at Intuitive, you formed Culture Co.
I did, yeah.
And it was a collective essentially of 5 female entrepreneurs, kind of a side hustle for everybody in today's
Very
vernacular.
much a side hustle. Yeah.
What were the pieces? Like, what were the 5 individuals doing?
Yeah. So when I first was really sort of visioning what this was going to look like, it was just culture and people, because that's the work I've done for so long. I was like, okay, I go in, I do this. But my work in CBI often, every quarter, I would take the 5 underperforming business units. So we had 42 across the province. I would take the lowest performing 5, go in, do culture work, and then I would see their profitability go up. So I was like, okay, this isn't just about feeling good at work, although that's a huge part of it. It's also about being fiscally responsible and creating sustainability in your business. And so the financial piece of it became important to me to be able to track, to say, okay, well, this is actually a measurable thing. It's not just that we're talking, about our feelings, sitting around. It's that we're actually moving the dial forward on ensuring that your business is going to be here for longer. So I pulled in someone who had a financial background, but it still was not, there was something missing. Like I just kept sitting on it. It wasn't feeling like it was completely there. And then I thought, oh, okay, that's it. I'm missing brand. So the goal and what I landed on was that we do the internal work and then we project that outwards. So that becomes your branding and marketing, is that it's not about like just saying things. You're doing the work internally. You're formulating what that means. You're including your people in that if you have a team. And then we are going outwards to find your people.
Have you found it difficult? Because essentially you're creating a new category in a sense. When you think of culture and people, you might think of, well, it's a recruitment firm or staff training. And then I found it really interesting that you added culture and people and brand, and the way you describe it is really compelling. Has it been difficult to teach people what Culture Co does?
Honestly, no one wants to do the hard work. I think that sitting down and, we have workbooks and we have questionnaires and we do deep dives, and we won't start working on brand until we've gone through that process with our clients. We had one client tell us that if he hadn't paid a deposit to us, he would have fired us because he didn't want to do the work. And we laughed. And I mean, he's totally over that hump now. But often people don't want to carve the time out to do that piece, which is why it's probably not as well known as brand development. When people hear we do brand, that's it. They take it and they run with it. And then that's sort of the direction we're heading. Oh, we do marketing. Okay. Well, yes, but no. Marketing is the outcome of what we do, because you have to tell people what you do. But the core goal is to get you to understand that the culture piece comes first.
Got it. And so the 5 of you were doing it on the side, and then 2 of you decided we're going to take that flag and stick it in the ground. And so this is a picture of you and your co-founder, essentially.
Correct.
Corley. And
yes.
Tell me how you met and what works in this relationship.
Corley followed me out into the parking lot after a PAC meeting. So I joined my kids' PAC before they were in the school, and she laughed because she already had a kid there. And she's like, well, who's this broad, which is exactly her words, coming up here telling us what to do in the PAC meeting, and she doesn't even have a kid in the school yet. I was from the school, so I was part of an alumni, so I felt like it was my school. But anyways, again, bossy, and just came in with full of ideas. And what she tells me is that she sat across the table and said, "We're going to be friends," and then she followed me out to the parking lot, and we ended up chatting. So we worked on lots of different things before the formulation, and Corley was actually the last person that sort of came into the fold. I identified at that point she was doing interior design. And for me, as someone, again, who sees the big picture of business, I look at office spaces and get really sad a lot of the time. So it's like they have these great brands, they're really exciting, and then you go to their office and you're like, wow, this is unmotivating. Who wants to work here, you know? So my thought was that, oh gosh, Coralie can really infuse that piece, which is not like if you come to my house, it's like very boring. So it's, you know, she can infuse that piece into it in a way that I am not able to do. And she just appreciated the hustle as much as I did. And so, you know, it became very obvious very quickly that the two of us, you know, were in it for the long haul, and the other women who I adore also had other jobs and families, and it just, you know, the hustle wasn't quite there. So
you've adopted that scrappy nature that worked earlier in that you guys are the core, but you bring on people for different roles and tasks as need be. What are some of the other pieces that come into what you do?
Well, I mean, brand development is very multifaceted, and we believe in housing all of those assets ourselves. So our goal with all of our clients is that we shoot their own media, essentially. So whether that's video, whether that's photos, it doesn't really matter. We make sure that they own all of that. So we bring in, you know, photographers and videographers as we need, just depending on sort of what the project looks like.
I've got a ton more pictures, and I'm going to treat them like wallpaper. They're just going to be here, and we'll keep talking.
That's totally fine.
But culture is definitely a thread, and as you've grown your practice, for the most part, it was laptop on the couch. But at some point, you got to the point where you wanted to kind of really put this out there, and I'm going to flip forward to this one, which is your space.
Yes.
So you decided in, I think around the beginning of 2020, you know, when everything's booming, that we're going to sign a lease and get a space. And right around the right around the corner is our friend COVID that pops his
correct
or her head up and just.
It's a him.
I said him or her. But tell me what the Co is.
You know, when we started Culture Co, I mean, again, we were both 100% doing this in our spare time. We both have 3 children and jobs, so I'm not sure when that existed, but it did. And we recognized quite quickly that we needed space, and we were struggling to find space in Chilliwack that matched our aesthetic, which anyone who's been to the Co will appreciate that it's a very particular aesthetic. So, you know, we wanted our place to really be a representation of our brand, which is very wild, quite unruly, makes her own rules, and does her thing. And so the goal was that we didn't really need a space for ourselves, but we could build something and we could invite other people into that. And our most favorite thing is when someone is doing something with the space that we had never really thought of, or they're creating, you know, business revenue for themselves in the housing of the Co. And so it has a photo studio in it, it has workshop space, and it has a couple of just rentable offices for the day.
And you're on Mill Street on second story?
Yeah. Yes.
And kind of got in just before downtown Chilliwack. It's now like the place to be.
Yeah.
And,
it was that space had found us prior to us selling the lease or getting the lease on it. And someone came in and swooped it up really quite quickly. So we just thought, okay, it's, you know, not the wrong time or whatever, and sort of just shelved that idea. But then they didn't survive through COVID. And so we thought, do we do it now? Do we do it later? Let's just go for it. And so we just went for it.
Cool. Mm-hmm. Creating spaces for people to realize their own potential. And I think that sums up.
That's our why.
Yeah, that's your why.
That is our why. Yeah. So it's, you know, not about one thing. And certainly there's people in it. So, you know, people is the thread of what we do. And I think the thread of my whole life, really, of every opportunity that I've ever had has been because of my relationships and people. But we really just want to help people reach their own potential. Like we so often get in our own ways that it's just like, let us help you remove that block. We're going to push you to not be in your own way. You know, whether you tell yourself you don't have enough time, whether you're just not ready, whether it's not perfect, you know, all of these things that we tell ourselves as to why we can't do something. Our goal is really to remove those obstacles and hold your hand a little.
And have you found there's a particular type of client that you work with which is best, or is it all over the map?
Oh my goodness. We have worked with all sorts of people. No, it's just people. You know, it's people will come to us and say, well, my business is like maybe something you've never seen before. And I always get a good laugh out of that. I'm like, how can I go from being an event planner to being in rehab to being, you know, this other thing? Who knows? I can't even put a label on it. You know, it's not different. You know, the functionality of what we do as entrepreneurs, even our struggles, to be honest, are often the same. We hit them at different spots maybe, but like we often go through so many of the same things. And, you know, we just sit down with clients and we've always been such a safe space. They cry, they laugh, they send us, you know, huge things that happen, huge accomplishments that they reach. And sometimes we're just a phone call to vent about how hard it is, you know? And I mean, going through COVID was interesting because we had both just quit our jobs when the pandemic hit. So we thought, uh-oh, what's going to happen? But, you know, we just saw so many people rise to the occasion within their own selves and made it through, which, you know, for anyone who's human, just gives you so much hope of what our capacity is as humans.
I know one piece that you've worked a lot on and with is the Chilliwack Economic Recovery Network. Mm-hmm. And that's many partners, including Community Futures and SEPCO and among others, mm-hmm. and have applied a lot of what you've learned into workshops mm-hmm. and adapted to online and Zoom and in person and so forth.
Yeah, we taught a lot through that time period. And yeah, it was pretty amazing because those programs didn't really exist before the pandemic in the same capacity. And then all of a sudden we saw, you know, this opportunity and there was funding available for businesses to get support, which, you know, to me is unprecedented when you're struggling and you don't really know what to do. And then all of a sudden you have a resource and you're like, oh my goodness, someone is here to help me, you know? And sometimes it was just about having someone to talk to. Like, here's my issue. What do I do? My business is closed down. I have all this staff. How do I keep them so that when we do open up again, you know? So it was conversations that none of us had ever really had before, but that so many of us were just willing to roll our sleeves up and say, okay, how do we do this? So yeah. In many ways, and I mean, I don't say this lightly, but in many ways, the pandemic gave us a lot of gifts that I saw throughout our community. Just people banding together in a way that they had never really done before. And I think that that's just such a beautiful thing to come out of it.
And we had the opportunity to do a project together through Community Futures and CERN, the Workforce Summit. Mm-hmm. And you were really the leader on that with Nicole Reed. And I would not have called you a bossy bum, but you definitely got a lot, you got it done, right? It was just putting it all together.
You called me that in your own head. It's okay.
No, I just saw your leadership and really putting it together and working with everybody. And so it was dreaming and planning and doing.
Yeah, this is our whole motto is dream, plan, do. You can't just dream. Mm-hmm. That will get you nowhere. So like, you know, I mean, I got a lot of dreams still in my head, but like you have to plan it and then you actually have to do it.
Tell me one of those dreams.
I want to write a book. That's like my top dream.
And what are your steps to make that happen?
I just have to sit down and write it. It's all in here. It just needs to come out.
Can you tell us the publishing date and put that on
holding on the accountable.
Line? Yeah.
2025.
So I think this is a picture in your space.
No,
maybe?
this was in LA, actually. No, this
It's
was
reminiscent of the photos I've seen of the Co.
Yeah, I mean, we're in our branding outfits.
Got it.
Leopard print and
Yes.
that was in when we had our client in LA, which was very exciting for us because that was sort of the first, like, oh my goodness, we can take this anywhere. The goal is really to be able to work off our laptop from a pool if needed. So, yeah.
And you guys just seem purpose-built as partners. How do you find a partnership as opposed to when you were chief everything? What are the good and the bad of that? Because Coralie will not be watching this video.
Never. She won't. I told her not to come for a reason. Just kidding. I think that communication is the biggest key really in any relationship. But when you have someone who is a 50% partner, you have to really be on the same page. And that doesn't always happen, and that's okay. I think we both entered into our partnership together knowing that we're both very strong and we both like to be the boss. And there are some things that I do better than she does, and there are some things that she does better than me. And so we try to own those roles as much as possible. Sometimes there's overlap, but for the most part, there's not, and there's no hard conversations. There are feelings, and then there is a quick chat, and then typically everyone feels better. So, I've modeled that throughout my whole career and brought that here. And, she's the same way, is that it's only uncomfortable for 2.5 seconds, and then we can just move on from it and come up with a plan around it. So communication, I think, if you are going to enter into a partnership, is really the biggest thing, the most important.
Well, let's end on that. Thank you very much, Nicki. Let's hear it for Nicki. And when I say end on that, I'll end my questions because obviously questions have percolated in your own heads. Michael is turning on a mic, and one thing I didn't mention, and I'm going to get her to put the camera on her for a moment, but Elise McAlpine is producing this show that you've been seeing over the corner of your... And so is she there? There she is. She's in her domain, and I wanted to definitely give her a shout out because she's doing a fantastic job.
She is doing a good job.
Yeah. So Nicki has the luxury of seeing what's going on. I need a screen over here. I need another screen. We've only got 22 screens in the studio space.
It's not enough screens. It's not enough.
Yeah, for sure. So do we have any questions? Colin's always good for a question.
Thanks so much for coming out and sharing this with us. I would love to hear just the mini version of when you start working with a new company. What does that process look like? What should someone expect in terms of the number of weeks? We understand from earlier it's a lot of work, but what's the time frame?
It honestly depends, Colin. I think it depends on what we're doing. So if we're going in and doing really deep, heavy business development, and the brand isn't really a part of that, then depending on sort of their urgency, which is often what is leading us, it takes at least a month, I would say, of us doing some really deep questioning of who are you, really framing things out, and then we can get to the doing part. If we're building the brand, though, sometimes it can take months before we have something that's out into the world. But again, that often just depends on our availability, their availability, and how quickly we can kind of move through those pieces. But when people are ready, which typically they are, maybe not fully knowing what that process is going to look like for them, they're typically at a point where they need help. And so they're like, okay, let's just get into it, right? So part of our process is they do self-work first. So we send them materials. They sort of start to think and really visualize what it is that is important to them, what their whys are, what their goals are, what the vision is, the people that they want to orient around them. And then from there, we sort of pick it up with them and say, okay, like, let's clarify this. What does this look like? Let's do some strategic planning and kind of go from there. Yeah.
I have a question about Culture Co.
Yes.
What is the culture of Culture Co. and how did you decide that's what it should be?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that, Michael. No one ever asks us about us. The culture of Culture Co., like our values are pretty specific, I think, to Coralie and I and the blending together of that. And that's actually an exercise that we revisit fairly often to make sure that we are still on the same page. Relationships, that piece is very, very important for us. And so connection is one of our deepest values, in that we feel connected to our clients, or clients feel connected to us, and we feel connected to their vision and their mission. Fun is an aspect that's really important to us. So like, if you know us, I would say that you would think that we're fun, and that we make the process fun, and that this isn't, although it's deep work and often can feel frustrating as we're restructuring things or building things out, we always are going to have a good time. So that is really important to us, because we didn't want a job where we just went and didn't have any fun. That's, not really who either of us are. And so that needed to be an aspect. The wow factor is also one of our values. And so that is delivering beyond the expectations of our clients. Hopefully, in most scenarios, is that we come in and we're to do this, and we're going to take it just a little bit higher. So that's really important to us as well. There's more, but I won't keep going.
Nicki, do you see any trends in terms of assisting some of the businesses, both some of the opportunities and challenges as the result of the pandemic? What do you see taking in terms of some of the businesses where it is now, the next 2 years, and then?
That's a great question, Nettie. Everyone is struggling with staffing. So I think the workforce, it's not only in our community, but it's very widespread. I honestly think it's everywhere, which is interesting. And to be honest, something that I wish I had more time to research a little bit, because I'm not sure where all the people have gone. I think that the people are still here, but for some reason they're not working. So either everyone, you got money during the pandemic that I'm not aware of, or there was a restructure, I think, of their own value systems to say, what am I going to invest my time into? What's important to me, for me, to give my time to? So I think there's a lot of that happening. We're in an interesting shift. I think also spent a lot of time looking at generational. What is this generation? What's important to them that's going to help them in the workforce later? How do they fit into the current workforce, which is like putting a square peg in a round hole? So how do we restructure that? So I think a lot of the conversations that I've had have been around staffing since the pandemic. For those that have teams, how do we get them motivated into our current way of doing things? And my answer is always, we have to rethink how we're doing work. The way that we're doing work and the way that we have previously spent most of the industrial age doing work is probably not how we're going to do work moving forward. So we need to put on our creativity hats and say, how can we do this differently? You don't need to measure someone from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. I think that's going to shift. However, on the flip side of that, everyone always asks us about how to market themselves. So how do I get more clients? How do I get myself out there? How do I, develop social media, my website, all of those pieces that the expectation for people's digital game is so high now that we find a lot of new entrepreneurs or solopreneurs who maybe don't have the capacity of being able to hire or have help. They're struggling in that. They don't really know quite how to do it. So we spent a lot of time over the pandemic building out strategies. It's like, do you have strategy? No. Okay, let's start there. Let's talk about what that actually looks like. Who are you talking to? Who are you trying to talk to? Who do you need to attract? What message? So, sort of architecting that out in a way that supported where they were in their business. So many businesses had to pivot in so many different ways. Like, I think we all have PTSD and probably will for a little bit about like having to switch directions so many times to be able to just make it through the day. But I think the two biggest things, digital is not going to go away. So our capacity to learn, and you must see this in the tech world, it's like, how much can we learn? And then it changes the next month. And then in 6 months from now, we all have to be dancing on TikTok, And it's like, what do you choose to focus on is overwhelming. It's very overwhelming. And so we spent a lot of time cutting down that overwhelm, hopefully to saying, okay, let's start here and then we can add on from there. But I don't think workforce is going anywhere either. So we're kind of in a little bit of a conundrum, I think, for the next little bit.
We've got time for one more question. I, for one, probably to my own detriment, have not focused on dancing on TikTok. But
Tim,
you see,
I think you'd be a star. I'm just saying, can't you see Tim
do we have one
taking
more?
over TikTok?
Do we have one more killer question? Michael has one.
I've got one then. You talked a little bit about solopreneurs, entrepreneurs who are on their own, starting their business perhaps. And I think the natural inclination is that the culture is just whatever I am, whatever I think. But how many people, or should people, think through what the culture should be for what they're representing as a company and as a brand rather than an individual?
Yes, 100%. So there are in some circumstances that people are building a personal brand. And so in that case, we would very much base it around them as a human and who they are and their family and all that they have to offer. Otherwise, we say 100%, even if you are just you right now, the goal is to actually build a brand outside of you. And we say to do that for multiple reasons, but it is also to let you off the hook a little bit. If you look at the brand of what Culture Co. is it Coralie and I personally? Not really. I mean, we do wear a lot of leopard print, but other than that, it's not really, it's influenced by us, but it's not us, And so we say to build the brand really as what you want the brand to do. I say all the time, honestly, Culture Co. on a daily basis asks me to be more, to do better, to reach higher, to go further. We released her and she did her own thing. We really didn't, we're, sometimes trying to catch up to her, like, oh my goodness, she's doing this now she's doing this, now she's doing that. And I think the goal is to see it outside of yourself so that you can build it as a business instead of it being so personal. Because then the thing is that when it's personal, every disappointment is heartbreaking. And I mean, the accomplishments are great too, but we tend to not focus on those as much as we do the disappointments, So if we're building it as a direct representation of who we are, then there becomes no space for us to fail. And failure is inevitable. You're going to fail at one point or another in some capacity. You're going to have bumps along the way. And so I think having that space in between you and your brand really allows you to sort of let yourself off the hook a little bit.
Well, thank you very much. Let's hear it for Nicki.